But Margaret's nuclear option revealed her true character in spectacular fashion. She arranged for city inspectors to visit my home weekly, claiming anonymous reports of safety violations and illegal business operations. Each inspection cost taxpayers money and accomplished nothing except harassment. But Margaret had enough political connections to maintain the pressure. The sound of official vehicles pulling into my driveway became as regular as mail delivery, and twice as annoying. Margaret's final desperate gambit was attempting to have my business license suspended through her connections at the planning department. She filed formal complaints alleging I was operating an illegal commercial enterprise from residential property, storing hazardous materials without permits, and violating zoning regulations. The paperwork was professionally prepared and strategically timed to coincide with her foreclosure proceedings, creating maximum legal pressure designed to force my surrender. Through all this escalation, I maintained the calm demeanor of someone holding royal flush cards while everyone else panicked over their weak hands. Margaret was burning through her credibility and political capital like a house fire consuming dry wood while I collected evidence that would fuel her destruction for years. Every harassment attempt was documented. Every false report was recorded. Every abuse of authority was photographed for future legal proceedings. Margaret thought she was playing chess, but I was playing four-dimensional warfare with nuclear weapons she couldn't see coming. Margaret's final acts of desperation arrived like a Category 5 hurricane making landfall. 4 days after the news story aired, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit appeared at my door carrying a briefcase that screamed, "Corporate Attorney." The morning air carried the metallic scent of impending storm clouds as he introduced himself as Richard Castellanos, legal representative for concerned community stakeholders. His cologne was expensive enough to choke a horse, and his smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. "Mr. Martinez, my clients are prepared to offer a generous settlement to resolve this unfortunate community dispute." The offer was breathtaking in its audacity. $75,000 cash to relocate my business operations and drop all complaints against Margaret and the association. "Consider this a goodwill gesture," Castellanos explained, sliding a cashier's check across my kitchen table like he was dealing blackjack. "My clients simply want to restore community harmony." The veiled threat hung in the air thicker than concrete dust on a windless day. "Of course, if you prefer continued legal complications and business disruptions, that's entirely your choice." I pulled out my phone and started recording, watching his polished demeanor crack like cheap paint in summer heat. But Margaret wasn't finished playing dirty pool. The smear campaign escalated from online reviews to full-scale character assassination involving Child Protective Services. Anonymous calls reported that neighbors with children were being endangered by industrial equipment and hazardous materials. CPS investigators arrived at Lisa Anderson's house to inspect her children's living conditions, after complaints about unsafe community environments created by commercial activities. The sound of official voices questioning parents about their children's safety because of my legal business operations made my blood pressure spike higher than a concrete pump. Margaret's psychological warfare expanded to targeting elderly residents with bureaucratic terrorism. Mr. Thompson received visits from Adult Protective Services after concerned citizens reported him as potentially incompetent due to neglected property maintenance and inability to maintain community standards. The sweet elderly man who baked cookies for community children suddenly found himself defending his mental capacity to government officials. Watching Mr. Thompson's confusion and fear during these visits was like watching someone kick a puppy. It required superhuman restraint, not to immediately destroy Margaret's operation. The harassment network had grown into a full-scale conspiracy involving city officials, contractors, and what appeared to be organized crime methodology. Margaret's husband Robert began following my work trucks, photographing license plates and documenting delivery schedules like he was conducting industrial espionage. Her daughter Jennifer started bidding against me for community concrete jobs, submitting estimates 35% below cost to steal my customers. The coordination was so sophisticated it resembled a military operation designed to destroy my livelihood through economic warfare. Community tensions reached breaking point when Margaret called an emergency meeting to announce the Premier Properties partnership as a done deal. The community center reeked of anxiety and cheap folding chairs as she presented architectural renderings showing luxury condominiums replacing our modest homes. Current residents will have first opportunity to purchase upgraded units, Margaret announced with the sincerity of a snake oil salesman. Though obviously not everyone will qualify for the enhanced community standards, the implied threat was clear. Submit to her authority or face forced relocation through financial pressure. Margaret's supporters began abandoning her sinking ship faster than rats fleeing a flood. Patricia Walsh quietly resigned from the board after learning about the criminal investigation into association financial irregularities. Tom discovered that his rental properties were also targeted for harassment and switched sides overnight. Even Margaret's closest allies started questioning her increasingly erratic behavior and obvious personal financial motivations. The sound of her political support structure collapsing was music sweeter than concrete mixers humming in perfect harmony. But Margaret's ultimate overreach revealed her complete disconnection from legal reality. She announced at the emergency meeting that foreclosure proceedings would continue regardless of community opposition, claiming board authority supersedes individual property rights in matters of community welfare. She actually believed her association presidency gave her government-level powers to seize private property. Margaret had crossed the line from community tyrant to delusional dictator, and her public statements were being recorded by multiple sources for future legal proceedings. The breaking point came when Margaret attempted to physically prevent my customers from accessing community streets. She positioned herself like a human roadblock, clipboard in hand, demanding identification from concrete truck drivers and threatening to call police for trespassing violations. Watching a 60-year-old retired insurance executive try to intimidate union concrete drivers was like watching someone challenge a freight train to a pushing contest, entertaining for spectators, but potentially fatal for the challenger. Meanwhile, my secret preparation was reaching final stages like a demolition project approaching detonation. Sandra had authenticated all master developer documentation with county officials. Bobby had completed financial analysis proving Margaret's embezzlement, and Lisa had assembled video evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The community was primed for Margaret's public destruction. Media contacts were briefed for maximum coverage, and legal documents were prepared for immediate filing. Margaret had spent months constructing her own scaffold, and execution day was approaching faster than gravity pulls falling concrete. The annual association meeting arrived like Judgment Day, and the community center had never seen anything like it. 97 of our 102 homeowners packed into a room designed for 60, with folding chairs squeezed together like sardines in a legal can. The air conditioning struggled against body heat and rising tension, while the scent of nervous perspiration mixed with industrial-strength floor cleaner. Local news crews positioned their cameras at the back, their bright lights turning the meeting into a televised spectacle. Officer Martinez from the sheriff's department stood near the exit, called for crowd control but clearly expecting fireworks. Margaret entered like a queen approaching her coronation, designer heels clicking against linoleum with military precision. She wore her most expensive suit and carried a leather portfolio thick enough to stop bullets, radiating confidence that would have been impressive if it wasn't about to be obliterated. Her supporters, now reduced to 6 retirees and her obviously uncomfortable husband, clustered around the front table like bodyguards protecting a dictator. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps preparing to swarm. "Thank you all for attending tonight's crucial meeting," Margaret announced, settling into her chair like she was claiming a throne. "We have important business regarding community improvements and compliance enforcement." Her voice carried across the packed room with the authority of someone who genuinely believed she controlled everyone's destiny. The crowd's murmur sounded like distant thunder before a devastating storm. Maria Gonzalez stood first, presenting a petition with 74 signatures opposing Margaret's harassment campaign. Her teacher's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel through flesh. "Mrs. Stevens, this petition represents families demanding your immediate resignation for abuse of authority, selective enforcement, and discrimination against working-class residents." The crowd erupted in applause that sounded like machine gun fire echoing off concrete walls. "David, this woman's been treating community funds like her personal ATM. These administrative consultation fees perfectly match her bankruptcy, lawyers' billing cycles, his laptop keys, clicked like machine gun fire as he cross-referenced dates with Margaret's court filings. Here's something every homeowner should know from Bobby's expertise. Association boards must maintain detailed financial records called general ledgers and check registers, and you have legal rights to examine these documents for personal expenses disguised as community business. Lisa Anderson transformed her spare bedroom into a surveillance command center that would make law enforcement jealous. Timeline charts covered every wall, while photography equipment capable of documenting evidence from 4 blocks away occupied her desk. Every harassment incident gets documented with timestamps and witness statements, Lisa explained while calibrating her cameras. Margaret's discrimination pattern will be so obvious that a legally blind judge could convict her. The mechanical whir of her printer, churning out evidence sheets, sounded like a slot machine hitting jackpot. Maria Gonzalez volunteered as our community educator, using teaching skills to inform neighbors about rights they never knew they possessed. Her own harassment documentation revealed Margaret's laser-focused targeting of single mothers, elderly residents, and working-class families. During our planning sessions, Maria's insight cut through legal complexity like a chainsaw through balsa wood. Margaret's not just power-hungry, she's operating a systematic discrimination campaign with association authority as her weapon. Maria's strategy involved hosting backyard meetings that felt like underground resistance gatherings where families shared horror stories and learned their legal options. Sandra outlined our legal strategy with surgeon-like precision. Master developer rights give us nuclear capability, but conventional weapons strengthen the case. We're filing for breach of fiduciary duty, selective enforcement, financial mismanagement, and civil rights violations. She'd researched similar cases where board members faced 6-figure personal liability judgments for exceeding authority and targeting demographics. Sandra's smile when discussing potential damages reminded me why I always hired the best subcontractors for critical projects. Bobby's financial investigation uncovered $52,000 in unauthorized diversions from reserve funds, including Margaret's personal legal fees disguised as community consultations. Her expense report showed payments to her daughter's landscaping company at 35% above market rates, while legitimate maintenance requests were denied for budgetary constraints. Most explosive was evidence of kickback arrangements with Premier Properties, where Margaret received consulting fees for facilitating community disruption that would benefit redevelopment schemes. Our intelligence operation expanded beyond financial crimes to document Margaret's harassment methodology. Lisa's photographs captured selective enforcement in vivid detail. Her daughter's industrial equipment parked overnight, while my legal trucks faced daily persecution, her husband's massive recreational vehicle violating aesthetic standards she imposed on others, her personal vehicles exceeding community parking limits without consequences. We cataloged every double standard, every discriminatory action, every authority abuse that Margaret had committed during her suburban dictatorship. Maria's underground meetings felt like wartime resistance gatherings where families shared harassment testimonies. While she documented each incident with academic thoroughness, Mr. Thompson revealed Margaret's attempts to declare him incompetent for maintaining gardens that allegedly violated aesthetic standards. The Johnsons described foreclosure threats for hiring my concrete services. Every family had experienced Margaret's targeting, and every story added ammunition to our discrimination arsenal. Watching these families realize they weren't alone was like watching concrete set, slow at first, then suddenly unbreakable. Meanwhile, I maintained normal routines while secretly preparing Margaret's public execution. My concrete business continued serving community customers despite her intimidation campaigns, and every job became evidence-gathering opportunities. I documented Margaret's interference with legitimate commerce, her attempts to ban customers from public streets, and threats against neighbors who hired my services. Each incident strengthened our case, while Margaret remained oblivious to legal explosive charges being planted beneath her authority foundation. Here's the beautiful irony that kept me awake nights with anticipation. Margaret was constructing her own gallows with every illegal action she committed. Our strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Let her continue digging until retreat became impossible, then detonate everything during a public meeting with maximum community attendance and media coverage. Margaret had spent months building her tyrannical empire. never suspecting she was creating evidence for her own destruction. The hunter had become the hunted, and Margaret was walking deeper into a trap baited with her own arrogance and seasoned with her victim's patience. Margaret's desperation reached nuclear levels when she realized her harassment campaign wasn't working. 3 weeks after our planning sessions, I received a foreclosure notice that looked more official than a Supreme Court subpoena. The thick legal paper smelled like fear and expensive attorneys, as Margaret claimed. Authority to seize my property for accumulated violations and unpaid assessments. She'd scheduled foreclosure proceedings for the following month, apparently convinced that financial terrorism would force me to surrender. What Margaret didn't know was that every threatening document she filed was digging her legal grave deeper than a septic tank foundation. The sabotage started subtly, like termites eating a house from the inside. My work trucks began experiencing mysterious problems. Sugar and gas tanks, slashed tires, and scratched paint that spelled out "Leave Now" in jagged letters. The acrid smell of vandalism lingered in my driveway like a toxic cloud. While Margaret maintained plausible deniability by being conspicuously visible during each incident, she'd scheduled her morning inspection walks to coincide perfectly with my discovery of damaged equipment, creating alibis while maximizing my frustration. Watching Margaret feign shock at my misfortune was like watching a toddler deny eating cookies with chocolate smeared across their face. But Margaret's most devious move targeted my business reputation directly. Anonymous complaints flooded the Better Business Bureau, claiming I'd performed shoddy work, stolen materials, and violated safety regulations. Fake online reviews appeared overnight describing fictional disasters involving my concrete services. Martinez Construction destroyed my driveway and flooded my basement. Read one obviously fabricated review posted by Concerned Homeowner 23. The digital assault was so coordinated, it looked like a military psychological operation designed to destroy my livelihood through character assassination. While Margaret escalated her attacks, I maintained my normal routine like nothing was happening. Every morning I loaded my trucks and headed to job sites, documenting each act of harassment while appearing completely unbothered by her campaign. My crew noticed the tension, but followed my lead, treating Margaret's intimidation attempts like annoying weather that would eventually pass. The sound of concrete mixers rumbling to life each morning became our defiant anthem, drowning out Margaret's clicking heels and whispered threats. Lisa Anderson's surveillance operation captured Margaret's coordination with her supporters in damning detail. Her telephoto lens recorded late-night meetings in Margaret's backyard where she distributed assignments to her community standards. Coalition Patricia Walsh received instructions to file noise complaints whenever my equipment started before 8:30. Tom was tasked with photographing every neighbor who hired my services. Margaret's husband Robert was assigned to follow my trucks and document traffic violations during concrete deliveries. The conspiracy was more organized than a military operation and twice as petty. The community pressure intensified like a pressure cooker approaching explosion. 4 more families received foreclosure. Threats over manufactured violations that would make a comedy writer weep with laughter. The Patels were cited for hanging laundry outside because it created visual pollution inconsistent with community standards. Elderly Mrs. Rodriguez faced fines for parking her 25-year-old pickup truck in her own driveway because it was commercially branded with her gardening business logo. Margaret's enforcement had become so absurd that neighbors started comparing violation notices like trading cards, laughing at the creative ways she'd found to harass working families. Local news picked up the story when Margaret called a press conference to announce her partnership with Premier Properties. Standing on her manicured lawn beside her husband's prohibited recreational vehicle, she explained how upgrading community demographics would benefit everyone. The irony was thicker than wet concrete as Margaret complained about commercial vehicles while literally standing next to her own violations. Reporter Jennifer Morgan, no relation to our Mr. Thompson, asked pointed questions about selective enforcement that made Margaret's prepared answers sound like a politician denying obvious corruption. When the Johnsons hired me to replace their deteriorating driveway, Margaret positioned herself like a surveillance operative, photographing truck movements and timing concrete deliveries with stopwatch precision. She attempted to intimidate neighbors who hired my services, claiming they were facilitating violations of established community standards. Watching Margaret try to intimidate 45,000-pound concrete mixers was like observing someone attempt elephant training with a feather duster and unrealistic expectations. Margaret's nuclear strategy revealed her true intentions with crystalline clarity. She filed property liens against 6 homes, including mine, for accumulated unpaid assessments and violation penalties. Her legal notices claimed foreclosure authority within 120 days if payments weren't immediately received. These documents arrived via registered mail with official courthouse weight, but they were constructed on legal foundations shakier than a condemned building in an earthquake zone. Margaret was essentially threatening to steal our homes for violations that were questionably legitimate in the first place. During this escalation phase, I conducted investigations that would impress professional detectives. Attorney Sandra had recommended requesting comprehensive association records under state disclosure laws, and the files I obtained contained more explosive material than a demolition warehouse. Margaret had systematically diverted association funds for personal legal expenses, disguising her bankruptcy attorney fees as administrative consultations. Community reserve funds designated for maintenance had vanished into unauthorized expenditures that coincidentally matched Margaret's documented financial emergencies. The smoking gun emerged when I discovered email exchanges between Margaret and Premier Properties, discussing residential demographic optimization and clearing problematic current residents. One message explicitly targeted working-class homeowners and minority families who allegedly wouldn't match the upgraded community profile standards. Reading those communications felt like uncovering a conspiracy, documented in black and white, complete with strategic timelines for manufacturing violations and accelerating foreclosure proceedings. The stench of discrimination was stronger than concrete sealer fumes. Mr. Thompson tearfully revealed that Margaret had visited with legal paperwork suggesting incompetency proceedings, claiming elderly residents required professional care environments rather than independent community living. Lisa Anderson documented systematic harassment over her children's outdoor toys, which Margaret classified as unsightly residential deterioration factors. Maria Gonzalez, our divorced teacher neighbor, faced relentless targeting for driving a modest Toyota instead of luxury vehicles matching Margaret's community expectation standards. Our community fractured faster than poorly mixed concrete in freezing weather. Margaret's supporters, predominantly affluent retirees and oversized houses, formed her Community Standards Coalition, while working families organized resistance meetings that resembled underground revolutionary gatherings. Property values plummeted due to constant chaos, which perfectly served Margaret's agenda of creating distressed sale opportunities for her development conspiracy partners. 4 additional families received foreclosure threats, prompting local news coverage of our escalating community conflict. Margaret embraced media attention like a politician during election season, portraying herself as a dedicated guardian of property values, battling commercial encroachment. She scheduled press interviews on her manicured front lawn, strategically positioned beside her husband's massive recreational vehicle, while condemning my work trucks for destroying community character. The hypocrisy was thicker than wet concrete and twice as obvious. But while Margaret basked in her media spotlight and community dictator role, I was uncovering county records that would detonate her entire power structure, something about my property's legal classification that Margaret had catastrophically failed to investigate, something that would transform the predator into prey faster than a concrete truck dumps its entire load, turning Margaret's empire into demolished rubble. The discovery that obliterated Margaret's entire world happened on a rainy Friday afternoon, in the county recorder's office, where the air hung thick with dust motes dancing in fluorescent light and the musty perfume of decades-old legal documents. Attorney Sandra had suggested researching the original subdivision development to strengthen our harassment case against Margaret. What we found instead was legal plutonium that would vaporize Margaret's tyrannical empire. Dorothy, the perpetually cheerful clerk who'd been filing documents since the 80s, pulled out the original subdivision plat from 1989. The yellowed papers crackled like autumn leaves as she spread them across the worn counter. And immediately something made Sandra freeze mid-sentence. My property wasn't listed like the others. Instead of standard residential designation, mine was marked Master Developer Lot, with covenant language that made Sandra's eyes bulge like she'd just witnessed a miracle. "Holy David," Sandra whispered, forgetting her professional decorum. "Do you realize what you're sitting on?" I squinted at the legal hieroglyphics covering the page. "Enlighten me before I have a heart attack from suspense." She jabbed her finger at specific clauses buried in the covenant maze. "Your property retains master developer rights from original subdivision creation. The builder kept approval authority over all association decisions, and those rights transfer automatically with ownership." The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. "You're saying I can veto Margaret's rules?" Sandra's grin could have powered the building's electricity. "Not just veto. According to these covenants, master developer has approval authority over all new ordinances, assessment changes, and board decisions. Margaret's commercial vehicle ordinance, dead without your signature. Her special assessments, legally worthless toilet paper. Her fines, invalid fantasies from a powerless dictator. We spent 3 hours excavating this legal goldmine while rain drummed against windows like applause for our discovery. The original developer had died 6 years ago. His estate sale included my house and all master developer privileges. The previous owner either missed this jackpot or didn't care, but everything had transferred to me automatically. I'd been wielding nuclear weapons while Margaret attacked me with foam pool noodles. Sandra outlined the full scope of my inherited superpowers with barely contained excitement. Master developer traditionally holds 51% voting weight in association matters. You can remove board members with 30-day notice. You can override any rules implemented without your approval. And here's the beautiful part. You can demand financial damages for harm caused by invalid board actions. The taste of pending victory was sweeter than concrete dust after a perfect pour. But beyond personal vindication, I felt something more powerful brewing. Margaret had systematically terrorized working families, threatened elderly residents like Mr. Thompson, and discriminated against anyone failing her suburban perfection standards. Now I possessed legal authority to demolish her reign of terror and rescue every family she'd victimized. Justice was about to be served with concrete mixer-sized portions. "We could destroy Margaret's operation immediately," Sandra continued. "But strategic patience will maximize damage. Let her continue excavating this crater while we document everything. When we publicly reveal your master developer status, the psychological impact will be devastating. Every rule she's passed, every fine she's issued, every threat she's made becomes evidence of board fraud and potential criminal activity." I thought about Mr. Thompson facing incompetency threats, Lisa Anderson harassed over children's toys, Maria Gonzalez targeted for automotive choices. Margaret had been playing chess while assuming she was the queen, never realizing I owned the entire board, the pieces, and the table. The cosmic irony was more perfect than a flawlessly level foundation. She'd been trying to exile me from a community where I held ultimate legal authority. Walking out of that courthouse into the cool evening air, I felt like I'd inherited a kingdom. Margaret had spent months making my life miserable, completely unaware she was attacking someone who could legally annihilate her authority with a single covenant document. The predator was about to discover she'd been stalking an apex predator, and her hunting season was permanently closed. The next phase felt like assembling the ultimate construction crew for the most satisfying demolition project of my career. Saturday morning, my kitchen table became mission control. Coffee brewing while legal documents spread across the surface like blueprints for Margaret's destruction. The rich aroma of Colombian dark roast mixed with the intoxicating scent of impending justice, as Sandra and I mapped our strategy. "We're not just stopping Margaret," she explained. "We're building a case that protects every family and ensures this nightmare never repeats." Bobby Thompson, our forensic accountant and Mr. Thompson's sharp-eyed son, became our financial detective. When I showed him Margaret's association expense reports, his reaction was immediate and colorful. Margaret's face was approaching fire engine coloration. "Those are different circumstances." "How exactly?" "Mr. Stevens's recreational vehicle is grandfathered under previous guidelines." "Show me those guidelines." More silence. The climate control activated, sounding like it was mocking this spectacle. And your daughter's overnight parking? That's temporary business equipment staging. My trucks are temporary business equipment staging. Your trucks are industrial. Board authority. Here's where circumstances became interesting. I lifted my phone and held it like a trophy. Actually, this meeting concerns selective enforcement and discrimination. I'm recording everything for my legal counsel, and every ridiculous justification you've offered tonight just became evidence. The room went completely silent, except for Patricia's frantic pen tapping. Tom appeared like he wanted to excavate through the floor to escape. Mrs. Stevens, I said, savoring every second, either enforce your regulations equally or acknowledge they're fraudulent. But I'm not paying extortion fees for violations that half the community commits daily. Margaret's composure finally fractured like cheap glass. Her voice increased an octave. Mr. Martinez, if you continue this disruptive conduct, we'll be compelled to take stronger measures. There it was, the threat I'd been anticipating. Because what Margaret didn't know was that while she'd been busy playing community dictator, I'd already begun investigating her background. And what I'd uncovered was going to overturn her world faster than a cement mixer in an earthquake. Margaret's stronger measures arrived like a swarm of locusts. Thursday morning, I was loading cement mix when a white municipal van arrived. Out stepped Margaret with some official in a clipboard and hard hat, her former colleague from the planning department, judging by their friendly conversation. The morning air carried asphalt's scent and impending bureaucratic conflict. Anonymous. Complaints about noise and safety violations, she announced with the smugness of a cat presenting prey. This inspector appeared like he'd rather be receiving medical procedures, probably because appearing with the complainant destroys any pretense of neutrality. I watched this unfortunate individual examine my property for 25 minutes, measuring boundaries, checking permits, photographing everything like he was documenting crime scenes. Margaret stood behind him, pointing at my trucks and whispering suggestions that sounded suspiciously like witness coaching. The concrete dust from my mixing area irritated my nose as I awaited their verdict. When he finished, the inspector actually smiled and shook my hand. Excellent setup, Mr. Martinez. Your concrete platform exceeds code requirements. Trucks are properly registered and your property maintenance is outstanding. No violations discovered. Margaret's face cycled through more color changes than mood jewelry in a microwave. But Margaret wasn't finished playing games. 3 days later, I received a registered letter from the State Contractor Licensing Board claiming anonymous complaints about illegal business operations from residential property. Someone had filed formal complaints alleging I was operating an unlicensed commercial operation, storing dangerous materials and violating zoning regulations. The complaint was detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. I'd wager my favorite hammer that Margaret's manicured fingerprints were covering this paperwork, along with her vanilla perfume's lingering scent. While handling that bureaucratic nightmare, I decided to investigate Margaret's background more thoroughly. My accountant friend, Bobby Thompson, had taught me some techniques during my divorce about locating financial records. And what I discovered made Margaret's harassment campaign appear amateur. She'd filed for bankruptcy 4 years ago, then refinanced her house twice in 24 months. Her credit report displayed more warning signs than a Soviet military parade. Most interesting was a pattern that elevated my blood pressure. She'd been targeting specific homeowners for violations, and every single one had sold their houses within 8 months at below-market prices. This wasn't just about my trucks. Margaret was conducting a systematic harassment campaign designed to force out working-class families and attract higher-income residents. During my years in construction, I'd learned that board members owe something called fiduciary responsibility to all homeowners. Basically, they can't utilize their position for personal vendettas without courts awarding serious financial damages to victims. Her complaint letters followed identical templates. Her violation notices targeted the same demographics, and her emergency meetings always seemed to coincide with properties entering the market. She was gentrifying the community one lawsuit at a time. I hired attorney Sandra Valdez, who specialized in association disputes and had a reputation for converting board presidents into legal casualties. After reviewing my documentation, Sandra filed formal complaints about selective enforcement and requested complete audits of association finances and Margaret's decision-making process. Sandra's smile when she explained potential damages reminded me why I always hired the best subcontractors. Margaret's response was predictably explosive. She called a special assessment vote for community beautification, proposing a $6,000 per household fee for visual improvements and community enhancement. During her presentation at the community center, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry insects, while she kept mentioning how this would maintain appropriate community standards and attract quality residents. Her supporters, mostly retirees and mansion owners, nodded along like dashboard figurines, while working families appeared like they'd been struck by financial locomotives. After the meeting, Margaret cornered me in the parking lot where cooling asphalt smell mixed with her desperation. "Mr. Martinez, this could all disappear if you'd just be reasonable about your truck situation." I retrieved my phone and started recording. Define reasonable. Her eyes glittered like broken glass in the streetlight. A modest relocation fee to cover administrative costs. Say $60,000. The number struck me like a sledgehammer to the stomach. There it was. Attempted extortion captured on digital recording. Margaret had just handed me enough evidence to bury her deeper than a septic tank foundation. The community was fracturing faster than concrete in an earthquake. Working families organized resistance meetings in Lisa Anderson's garage, while Margaret's supporters formed her Community Standards Committee. Mr. Thompson confided that Margaret had visited him, suggesting elderly residents might be happier in assisted living facilities with proper support services. 4 more families received foreclosure threats over manufactured violations. Lisa got cited for her children's bicycles being improperly stored in her own garage. Teacher Maria Gonzalez was written up for driving a vehicle inconsistent with community image standards. But Margaret had made one catastrophic mistake in her quest for suburban dictatorship. She'd declared war on someone who was about to discover he possessed legal weapons of mass destruction in this particular battle. While she played petty tyrant, I was uncovering something in the county records that would detonate her entire power structure like controlled demolition. Margaret's next move was so audacious, it deserved recognition for community villain. She announced a partnership with Premier Properties, a development company that specialized in transforming modest subdivisions into luxury playgrounds for the wealthy. At a hastily called board meeting, the conference room reeked of cheap coffee and expensive schemes as Margaret presented glossy brochures showing enhanced community concepts featuring upscale condominiums and premium amenities. She explained how selling our common areas for community improvement would generate beautification funds, conveniently omitting that her husband Robert had been secretly consulting for Premier Properties for 8 months, earning fees that mysteriously matched their mortgage payments. I discovered Robert's consulting arrangement through financial records, but decided to let Margaret excavate her own grave before I provided the shovel. Sometimes in construction, the smartest move is watching other crews' foundations crack before pointing out their structural failures. Lisa Anderson, leveraging her journalism background, had been documenting Margaret's clandestine meetings with Premier representatives, photographing license plates, and recording visit schedules. Our investigation revealed a systematic acquisition, plan targeting distressed properties at below-market prices, followed by complete subdivision redevelopment into luxury housing that working families couldn't afford. The harassment campaign escalated like a natural disaster gaining strength. Margaret instituted monthly compliance inspections that resembled military occupations more than community oversight. She issued violations for grass height variations of 3/4 inch, mailbox colors allegedly violating community aesthetics, and Mr. Thompson's beloved garden gnome collection that apparently threatened residential dignity. The metallic click of Margaret's designer heels on concrete sidewalks became our community's air raid siren, warning residents to hide anything that might trigger her regulatory wrath. My concrete business transformed into her primary battlefield target. Margaret threatened legal action for chronic noncompliance and claimed authority to ban my customers from community streets. Your daughter's 500-gallon chemical sprayer isn't industrial? Lisa Anderson raised her hand like we were in grade school. When were these grandfather provisions established? Tom shifted like his seat was constructed of thorns. We haven't formally documented, so they don't exist, I interrupted. You're improvising exemptions in real time. Margaret launched from her chair like she'd been catapulted. This meeting concerns Mr. Martinez's noncompliance. Not armed with authority badges, expensive footwear, and 8 years of neighborhood control, she had everything except the actual legal power to enforce it. Margaret Stevens positioned herself in my front yard that crisp Wednesday morning, brandishing a citation document like some royal proclamation. $700 monthly for storing my work vehicles on my own land. The sheer nerve was astounding. These community association dictators assumed they controlled our very existence. While she threatened seizure of my home for excessive automobiles, her spouse's enormous motorhome dominated their yard like a testament to double standards. This woman genuinely believed she could confiscate my property while ignoring identical infractions. What Margaret remained unaware of would completely devastate her reign of terror. Hidden within forgotten municipal archives lay documentation that would reverse this power structure entirely, something that would convert her from community despot to criminal suspect, faster than mortar hardens on scorching pavement. Have you ever fantasized about completely destroying someone who believed they wielded authority over you? That's precisely what unfolded here. And the retribution was so satisfying it remains legendary throughout Orange County. Allow me to describe how this entire catastrophe began. I'm David Martinez, age 54, operating Martinez Construction Services here in Orange, California, fourth-generation builder. My great-grandfather began with basic tools and determination. My father developed it into a legitimate enterprise, and I expanded it into a $2.8 million operation employing 18 local workers. 8 months prior, I'd endured a divorce that resembled financial amputation without painkillers. Nothing melodramatic, simply two individuals who drifted apart. However, I required a clean slate somewhere fresh. My former wife's attorney couldn't locate additional assets for division. Therefore, I purchased this immaculate 4-bedroom ranch home in Willowbrook subdivision for $520,000 cash. Ideal community, the type where aromatic wood chips and weekend morning java drifted from every entrance, blended with honeysuckle's fragrance climbing pristine boundary fences. I invested an additional $40,000 in landscaping because I believe in excellence. My 3 commercial trucks, cement mixer, flatbed, and crew vehicle, rested orderly in my semicircular driveway like dormant titans. That's when I encountered Margaret Stevens. Meeting Margaret was like triggering an explosive device disguised as hospitality. Picture a 60-year-old former insurance executive who'd served as association president for 8 consecutive years without opposition. She occupied the community's showcase property, a sprawling Mediterranean that likely cost $900,000 and appeared suitable for luxury magazine covers. This woman measured lawn height with actual measuring devices and carried inspection clipboards during her morning patrol walks. Her costly heels struck pavement like a timepiece counting towards someone's destruction. Every morning precisely at 8:30. During our initial introduction, I should have contacted moving companies immediately. Welcome to Willowbrook, Mr. Martinez. I assume you comprehend our community upholds specific standards, not pleased to meet you or welcome to our neighborhood. Community. Standards as if she represented immigration. And I was requesting residential permits. For 4 months, everything appeared acceptable. I maintained my property at magazine standards, assisted elderly Mr. Thompson next door with shopping, even repaired his damaged sidewalk without charge. My trucks parked legally in my personal driveway, identical to everyone else's boats, recreational vehicles, and luxury automobiles. Then came that Wednesday morning in November when my doorbell chimed at 7:45. Postal worker delivering registered mail that felt like legal dynamite. The paper was inexpensive copy material, but the menace was premium grade. Violation notice, screamed in crimson capital letters. Commercial equipment exceeds community visual standards and adversely affects property valuations. Immediate compliance demanded or encounter progressive penalties. Here's where circumstances became intriguing. Margaret demanded I remit a $700 monthly visual impact assessment or relocate my trucks completely. $700 for parking my legitimate work vehicles on my own land that I owned completely. I spent that evening studying every section of my association regulations twice. Zero mention of commercial vehicle limitations anywhere. But here's the delicious contradiction. Every Thursday, Margaret's landscaping team parked their diesel trailer, industrial equipment, and chemical containers directly before her residence for 5 hours. The harsh odor of their machinery exhaust lingered like automotive hypocrisy. When I approached her door that evening for adult discussion, Margaret positioned herself in her entrance like she was protecting her castle. "Mrs. Stevens, I reviewed the regulations. There's no restriction regarding work vehicles. The board possesses authority to establish new guidelines for community benefit. Your industrial trucks are unsuitable for residential neighborhoods, yet your landscapers park commercial equipment here weekly." Her smile could have frozen coolant. "That's different. That's maintenance services, not industrial storage." Different. Observing her expression in that moment, I realized this wasn't about trucks or property values. This concerned power, control, and perhaps something more sinister, determining who deserved residence in her neighborhood. I faced 2 options: submit or resist. What Margaret didn't realize was that she just initiated conflict with someone about to discover he controlled the entire battlefield. But first, she would provide me with additional weapons. Margaret didn't hesitate escalating this warfare. 4 days after our doorway confrontation, I discovered another registered letter in my mailbox. Emergency Association Board meeting scheduled for Friday at 7 o'clock. 36-hour notice for session addressing ongoing community compliance matters. I arrived to find exactly 4 people in Margaret's living room: herself, her neighbor Patricia Walsh, some rental property investor named Tom, 4 of 9 board members. The room smelled like cinnamon candles and fresh desperation because what they planned was completely illegitimate. "Thank you for attending, Mr. Martinez," Margaret said, settling into her leather chair like a discount autocrat. "We've convened this meeting regarding the commercial vehicle situation." I retrieved my phone and began recording. "This meeting violates association bylaws requiring 10-day advance notification." Margaret's smile could have soured cream. "Emergency circumstances permit expedited processes." What emergency? My trucks have remained there for months. That's when Tom attempted playing mediator. "Listen, David, we're simply trying to preserve property values. Perhaps we can reach agreement." "The board has decided," Margaret announced. "Commercial vehicle ordinance approved. You have until Monday to comply or face 150 daily penalties." I leaned back in their uncomfortable metal chair. "You voted?" "I didn't witness any voting." "We voted before your arrival," Patricia mumbled without eye contact. "Wonderful. A secret ballot before an illegal meeting to approve an invalid regulation." These individuals had apparently missed the day they taught association law in Tyranny Academy. You see, I'd learned something during my divorce proceedings. Bylaws are contracts, and when boards enforce regulations selectively, they violate equal treatment principles that courts absolutely devastate. That weekend, I conducted investigating that would impress professional detectives. Turns out Margaret's daughter, Jennifer, operates Stevens Landscaping and parks her trailer, industrial equipment, and chemical tanks overnight in our community twice weekly. Not during service appointments, overnight storage. Meanwhile, Margaret's husband, Robert, maintained a 40-foot recreational vehicle and boat trailer, permanently stationed in their side yard like monuments to hypocrisy. Monday morning arrived with opportunity's sweet sound knocking. The next board meeting was Tuesday evening at the community center, and I came prepared with a manila folder thick, enough to deflect projectiles. I'd invited Mr. Thompson and neighbor Lisa Anderson as witnesses, because what I planned deserved an audience. "Before we discuss my trucks," I announced, standing with my evidence folder, "let's address some enforcement inconsistencies." I distributed photographs across the table like a card dealer revealing winning hands. Jennifer's landscaping trailer parked overnight on Willow Street. Robert's recreational vehicle violating their own visual standards. 4 other neighbors with work vans, boats, and recreational vehicles somehow invisible to Margaret's surveillance eyes. The silence was so dense you could slice it with tools. Tom appeared like he'd prefer undergoing surgery. Patricia's pen tapping sounded like an agitated woodpecker. "This is targeted persecution," I continued. "You've created regulations specifically to attack me, while exempting your associates and family.